Logan Mercer had 48 hours before the bank took his house. He had $7 in his wallet, a 7-year-old daughter asleep upstairs, and a manila envelope on the kitchen table with his name written in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside, a single card, a downtown address, and 4 words printed in clean black ink. Come alone. Bring nothing. Most men would have thrown it away. Logan wasn't most men. He was a father running out of options, and that made him exactly the kind of man who walks into a stranger's building at 9 in the morning, not knowing if he's about to change his life or end it. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along to the very end because what happens between these two people is something you won't see coming. The envelope had been wedged between the screen door and the frame when Logan got home from his shift the night before, and he almost didn't see it. He'd been moving on autopilot by then, boots off at the door, keys on the hook, quick check down the hall to make sure Emma's light was off. She had school in the morning, and she'd inherited his habit of staying up too late reading with a flashlight under her blanket, so he always checked. The light was off. He stood there for a moment in the dark hallway listening to the specific quiet of a house where a child is sleeping, that particular stillness that was the only thing some days that kept him going. And then he turned around and saw the envelope on the mat. No return address. His name spelled out in full. Logan James Mercer. Not a bill, not a flyer. Something deliberate. He took it to the kitchen and set it on the table and looked at it for a long time without opening it. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove read 11:47. He'd been on his feet for 9 hours. A double at the warehouse distribution center out on Route 9. The second job he'd picked up 3 months ago when the hospital called about the final balance on Karen's account, and he did the math and understood finally and without any remaining delusion that he was not going to be able to cover it. He opened the envelope. The card inside was heavy stock, cream-colored, the kind that costs money. On the front, just an address. A building downtown on Meridian Avenue that he vaguely associated with finance companies and law firms. On the back, 4 lines. Mr. Mercer. You have been identified as a candidate for a private business arrangement. Compensation is significant. Come alone. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. No name, no phone number, no explanation of what identified meant or who had done the identifying. Logan read it twice, then set it down and went to the refrigerator and stood there looking at its contents for no real reason, just to do something with his hands. 1/2 gallon of milk. Leftover pasta Emma hadn't finished. 3 eggs. A block of cheddar going dry at the corner. He closed the refrigerator and went back to the table and looked at the card again. 48 hours. That was what the bank had given him. Or rather, that was what the letter from the bank had implied in the specific bureaucratic language that meant, we are done being patient. The mortgage was 4 months behind. The medical debt was sitting in collections. He'd sold Karen's car back in February, and the money from that had lasted 6 weeks before it disappeared into the ordinary costs of keeping a child alive and fed and enrolled in school. He'd applied for 3 jobs since then that paid better than the warehouse and hadn't heard back from any of them. He was 32 years old, and he was losing the house he'd bought with his wife in the first year of their marriage, the house Emma had come home to from the hospital, and he didn't have a plan anymore. He'd used up all his plans. He picked up the card and put it in his shirt pocket and went to bed. He dropped Emma at school at 7:45, same as always. She had her backpack with the yellow daisy patch she'd ironed on herself, badly, one corner already peeling, and her hair in the lopsided braid he'd been slowly getting better at over 2 years of practice. She was in 2nd grade. She was missing a front tooth. She had her mother's eyes, dark and watchful, and a little too perceptive for a 7-year-old, and she had a habit, when she sensed something was wrong, of not asking directly but instead making herself very helpful, offering to carry things, getting quiet, watching him from the side. She'd been very quiet that morning. "You okay, buddy?" he asked when they were parked in front of the school. "Are we moving?" she said. He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead through the windshield at the school entrance. "Why would you ask that?" Jalen at school said sometimes when parents are stressed, it means they're moving. She paused. "You've been stressed." Logan put his hand on the back of her head gently, the way he used to when she was small enough that his whole palm covered her skull. She was getting too big for that now. It still worked on him, though. "We're not moving," he said, and he meant it to sound like a fact, but it came out like a promise, which was worse, because promises were things you had to keep. Emma looked at him then, with those eyes. "Okay," she said, and got out of the car. He watched her walk through the entrance and didn't pull away from the curb until she was inside. The building on Meridian Avenue was glass and steel, 20 stories, the kind of structure that announced itself without trying. Logan parked on the street, parallel parking, third try, he was never going to be good at it, and sat for a moment looking up at the building through the windshield. He thought about leaving. He thought about it the way you think about it when you know you're not actually going to, when the thinking is just a formality you go through before doing the thing you've already decided to do. He was here because he had 48 hours and $7, and a daughter who'd asked him this morning if they were moving, and the answer he'd given her was a promise he couldn't keep on his own. He got out of the car. The lobby was marble and quiet, the kind of quiet that buildings achieve through money. A security desk, elevators that didn't have any visible buttons on the outside. A man in a dark suit who looked up when Logan came through the revolving door and said, without any preamble, "Mr. Mercer, 18th floor, they're expecting you." Logan stopped. "You know my name." "Yes, sir." "How do you know my name?" The man smiled pleasantly. 18th floor, sir. The elevator on the left." Logan rode up alone, watching the numbers rise, and by the time the doors opened onto a corridor with pale walls and a single frosted glass door at the end, he had decided that if this turned out to be something illegal, he was going to turn around and leave, and that was that. He had a daughter. He had limits. The frosted door had no nameplate. He knocked. "Come in," said a woman's voice. The office was large and spare. Floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides, city view, morning light coming in flat and bright. A conference table that could have seated 10 with only 2 chairs placed at one end, one at the head, one to the side. A bookshelf, mostly empty. A desk in the corner that looked like it hadn't been used in a while. The woman in the chair at the head of the table was not what Logan had expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he'd expected. She was young, younger than he'd somehow imagined, with dark hair pulled back and a face that was striking in the particular way of someone who has learned, over time, to hold very still. She was wearing a blazer over a dark blouse, and her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and she was watching him the way people watch you when they've already made up their mind about something, and they're waiting to see if you'll confirm it. The wheelchair was visible once he was fully inside the room. Low-profile, dark frame, positioned exactly at the table's edge. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Sit down." It wasn't unfriendly, it was just direct in a way that didn't leave much room for small talk, and Logan, who had been up since 6 and was running on diner coffee and anxiety, found he didn't mind that. He sat. "I'm Charlotte Vaughn," she said. "I'm the CEO of Vaughn Capital Management. I'm guessing you didn't know that when you came up here." "I didn't know much of anything when I came up here," Logan said. Something moved in her expression. Not quite amusement, but close. "That's fair. Let me explain why you're here." She unfolded her hands. "You were referred to me through a mutual contact. Someone who knew your wife, actually. A woman named Darlene Cho. She mentioned your situation." Logan processed that. Darlene Cho had been Karen's college roommate, a kind woman who'd brought food to the house twice after the funeral, and then, the way people do, gradually disappeared back into her own life. He hadn't talked to her in almost a year. "She told you I'm broke," Logan said. "She told me you're a person in a difficult situation who she believed was trustworthy," Charlotte said, and there was something measured in her tone, like she was being careful about the difference. "What I need right now is someone trustworthy." "For what?" She looked at him for a moment, then, "How familiar are you with the terms of inherited corporate structures in private equity firms?" "Not familiar at all." "Short version," she said. "My father founded this company. He left me controlling interest in his will, but with conditions attached. One of those conditions is that I be married by my 31st birthday, which is 8 weeks from today, in order to retain full control of the company. If I'm not married, controlling interest reverts to a board committee that includes a man named Vincent Hale, who has been trying to dismantle my father's company and consolidate its assets into his own portfolio for the last 3 years. Logan looked at her. You're serious? I'm always serious. That condition, the marriage thing, that's actually legal? My father's attorneys were very creative, she said, and the way she said it made clear this was not a compliment. It's been challenged once already, and it held. It's legal. Logan sat with that for a moment. And you're asking me to, a contract, she said. 6 weeks. Legally married, publicly visible, nothing more than that. You maintain separate living quarters in my home, your daughter is welcome, and at the end of the 6 weeks you receive $250,000 and we file for an uncontested divorce. The number landed somewhere in the center of his chest and sat there. $250,000. He could clear the medical debt. He could save the house. He could breathe for the first time in 2 years. Why me? He said. I told you, trustworthy. There are a lot of trustworthy people. There are a lot of people who say they're trustworthy, she said. Darlene knows you. That's more than I have with most candidates. She paused. Also, your situation means you need this to work as much as I do. That's not a small thing. It was blunt in a way that Logan might have found offensive if it hadn't been accurate. I have a daughter, he said. I know. This would affect her. I understand. She's 7. She's been through a lot. I can't bring her into something that's going to confuse her or hurt her. Charlotte's expression shifted slightly, just slightly, a tightening that he couldn't quite read. I'm not planning to put a 7-year-old through anything difficult, Mr. Mercer. She'd have a room of her own. She'd still go to her school. Your life with her doesn't have to change. It just relocates temporarily. Logan looked down at his hands on the table. His wedding ring was still on. He hadn't been able to take it off yet, not all the way, though he'd moved it to his right hand sometime in the fall. He'd moved it back to his left last week without really thinking about it. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. Charlotte slid a business card across the table. I need an answer by end of day tomorrow. The legal documents are already prepared. If you agree, we'd move quickly. He picked up the card. And if I say no? She held his gaze. Then I find someone else, or I don't, and I spend the next 5 years fighting Vincent Hale in court for what my father built. A pause. I'd rather not do that. He nodded slowly. He stood up. Mr. Mercer, she said, as he moved toward the door. He turned. You can ask whatever you want, she said. I'd rather you ask now than agree and have reservations later. Logan thought about it. The wheelchair, he said. Is it permanent? Her face didn't change, but something in her shoulders did, something barely perceptible. That's to be determined, she said. It wasn't an answer, but the way she said it made him certain it was all she was going to give him. And he was self-aware enough to recognize that he didn't have the standing, not yet, not as a stranger, to ask for more. He left. He drove to the warehouse and worked his shift and didn't tell anyone where he'd been that morning. There was nothing to tell yet, but the number kept surfacing through the hours, 250,000, the way a thought does when it attaches itself to something urgent and won't let go. His supervisor, a heavy-set man named Dale, who'd been at the warehouse for 19 years and had a gift for noticing when people were off, caught up with him at the break room around 2. You look like you're doing math, Dale said. Just tired. Dale poured himself coffee and didn't push it, which was why Logan liked him. Emma's good? She's good. Smart kid? Yeah. Dale leaned against the counter. You know there's extra holiday hours coming up, if you want them. I want them, Logan said immediately. Dale nodded. I'll put you down. Logan drank his coffee and looked out the break room's small window at the loading dock, where a truck was being backed in with the practiced patience of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. He thought about Charlotte Vaughn's office, the spare walls, the empty-looking desk, the way she'd sat with her hands folded on the table like she was holding herself together through deliberate effort. He thought about the moment when he'd asked about the wheelchair, and she'd said, "That's to be determined," and he'd seen something happen in her shoulders. He went back to work. He made dinner that night, pasta again, because it was cheap and Emma ate it, and they sat at the kitchen table and she told him about a project she was doing in class about animals and how she'd decided to do hers on axolotls because they could regrow their limbs. They can regrow their limbs, she said for emphasis. I heard you the first time. That's amazing though, right? It is actually pretty amazing. I want one, she said. An axolotl. Yes. We're not getting an axolotl, Emma. Why not? Because we don't have a tank. We could get a tank. Emma. She ate a bite of pasta. I'm just saying, scientifically, they're very interesting animals. I know. And they look like little dragons. I know. Little pink dragons. Eat your dinner. She ate her dinner, but she was smiling, and he was smiling, and it was the kind of ordinary moment he'd learned over the last 2 years to recognize as something he should pay attention to, because ordinary moments were what a life was actually made of, and they were worth more than he'd understood before he almost lost everything. After she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the business card in front of him and thought for a long time. $250,000. 6 weeks. A daughter who deserved a stable home. Charlotte Vaughn, with her carefully still face and her empty desk and the answer she'd given him that wasn't quite an answer. He picked up his phone and called the number on the card. It rang twice. Mr. Mercer, she said. No hello. I have conditions, he said. A pause. Tell me. Emma doesn't get told it's a business arrangement. We tell her it's, I don't know, that we're friends, that we're trying something. Something that a kid can understand without it being confusing or upsetting. I'll figure out the language. Agreed. I have my own room, like you said. You don't interfere with how I parent her. I wasn't planning to. And if something feels wrong, if anything feels wrong for her, I pull us out. The money doesn't matter. She comes first. There was a moment of silence. He couldn't tell if she was writing things down or just thinking. Agreed, she said finally. All of it. Okay, he exhaled slowly. I'm in. Another pause, longer this time. I'll have the document sent tonight, she said. My assistant will coordinate a time for signatures tomorrow. And then, after a beat that felt like it cost her something. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Logan, he said. What? If we're doing this, you should probably call me Logan. A pause. All right, she said. Logan. And then quieter. I'll see you tomorrow. She hung up. He sat at the table for a while longer. The house was quiet. Above him, Emma was asleep, possibly with a flashlight and a book about axolotls. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove read 10:22. He was going to save this house. He was going to clear the debt. He was going to give his daughter the stable home she deserved. Those were good things. Those were the things he was doing this for, and they were enough. The legal documents arrived via email at 11:15 that night, 47 pages from a firm Logan had never heard of. He sat at the kitchen table with his reading glasses. He'd started needing them 6 months ago and was still faintly annoyed by this, and read through them with the careful attention of someone who doesn't have money for a lawyer, but understands that what you don't read can hurt you. They were thorough. The term was 6 weeks, not a day more, unless both parties agreed in writing. Compensation of $250,000 paid in 2 installments, 50% at signing, 50% at the filing of divorce papers. Logan and Emma were to reside at the Vaughn estate for the duration. Logan was required to appear at a minimum of 4 public events in the role of Charlotte's spouse. No discussion of the contract's nature with third parties, and a clause at the bottom of page 31 that made him stop and read twice. In the event of genuine emotional harm to either party or to the minor child of Party B, either party may initiate early dissolution with no financial penalty. Someone had thought to put that in there. He didn't know if it was Charlotte or her lawyers, but whoever it was had understood that this arrangement had a person in it besides the 2 of them who didn't get a say, and they'd built in a protection. He appreciated that more than he could have explained. He signed the documents at midnight and sent them back. Jet. He told Emma over breakfast. He'd been thinking about the language since the night before, turning it over, trying to find the version that was honest enough that it wasn't a lie, but simple enough that a 7-year-old could hold it. He settled on close to the truth. I've met someone, he said. A woman. She needs some help, and we're going to go stay at her house for a little while to help her out. You'd still go to your school. Everything stays the same. We'd just be somewhere different for a few weeks. Emma looked at him over her cereal. Like a friend? Sort of like a friend, yeah. Does she have kids? No. Does she have animals? I don't know, actually. Emma appeared to consider the whole situation. What's wrong with her? What do you mean? You said she needs help. Logan paused. She's in a wheelchair, he said. And she's going through a hard time with some things. We're going to be there while she works through it. Emma ate a spoonful of cereal. Then, can I bring my axolotl book? We don't have an axolotl book. The library book about axolotls I checked out. Oh. Yeah, you can bring that. Okay, she said. And that was that. In the way that 7-year-olds sometimes accept complicated things with a simplicity that adults have forgotten is possible. He loaded 2 suitcases and a cardboard box into the back of his car that afternoon after school. Emma carried her backpack and her library book and her stuffed rabbit, whose name changed depending on what she'd been reading but was currently called Professor Buttons. He drove to the Vaughn estate with his daughter in the back seat and Professor Buttons on the seat beside her, and he didn't let himself think too hard about what he was walking into, because thinking too hard about it wasn't going to help. Shan. The estate was on the north side of the city, set back from the road behind a stone wall and mature trees that had been there longer than any of them. The driveway was long enough that you couldn't see the house from the gate, and when the house came into view, Logan felt Emma go still in the back seat. It was a significant house. 3 stories, stone and brick, surrounded by gardens that were maintained with the care of things that take money to sustain. Not a mansion in the movie sense, no columns, no absurdity, but simply a very large, very old house that communicated, without effort, that serious people had lived here for a long time. Whoa, Emma said. Yeah. Is this her house? It's her house. She lives here by herself? Logan pulled up in front of the main entrance where the driveway circled. I think so. Emma was quiet for a moment. That seems lonely, she said. Logan turned off the engine and sat for a second with that. Yeah, he said. Maybe it is. The front door opened before they got there. A woman in her 50s, composed, efficient, a set of keys at her hip, held the door and introduced herself as Mrs. Aldridge, the estate manager. She showed them to their rooms. Emma's was on the second floor, pale blue walls, a window seat overlooking the garden, a twin bed with a white quilt. Emma walked in and made a slow circle and then went directly to the window seat and sat in it and looked out at the garden with the expression of someone who has just received something they didn't know they needed. Logan's room was across the hall. Larger, darker adult furniture, its own bathroom. Clean and impersonal in the way of rooms that haven't had someone actually living in them. Mrs. Aldridge showed him the kitchen, the main hallway, the layout of the ground floor. Miss Vaughn is in her study, she said. She asked that you settle in first. She'll see you at dinner. Logan nodded. Thank you. He went back upstairs. Emma was still in the window seat, library book now open in her lap. You good? He said from the doorway. There's a bird bath in the garden, she said without looking up. There's a bird in it right now. What kind of bird? I don't know, a brown one. Logan leaned against the doorframe and looked at his daughter sitting in a window seat in a house that wasn't theirs, calm and contained and already at home in the way that children manage when the adults around them haven't panicked. He felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly. More like the first breath after a long time underwater. He went to unpack. Dinner was in the formal dining room, which was the wrong room for 3 people. Logan had set the table where Mrs. Aldridge directed him, and now he and Emma were seated at one end of a table that could have held 14, and it felt like being in a room that was waiting for a party that wasn't coming. Charlotte came in at 7 on the dot. She changed out of the blazer. Dark sweater now, no jewelry. She navigated the doorway and positioned herself across from Logan at the table and didn't acknowledge the awkwardness of the space or the absurdity of the seating arrangement, just said, "Hello," and then looked at Emma. Emma looked back at her. "You must be Emma," Charlotte said. "Yes," Emma said. "You're Charlotte?" I am. Emma considered her. My dad said you're in a wheelchair. Emma, Logan started. I am, Charlotte said, her tone unchanged. Does that bother you? Emma appeared to think about this seriously. The way she thought about things she actually wanted to get right. No, she said finally. My friend Mia has a grandma in a wheelchair, and she's really nice. She makes really good cookies. I don't make cookies, Charlotte said. That's okay. Not everyone has to. Something happened in Charlotte's expression. Logan caught it from the corner of his eye. The briefest softening, there and gone in under a second, like a window opened and immediately closed. That's true, Charlotte said. Not everyone does. Mrs. Aldridge brought out the food. It was more elaborate than Logan had been expecting. Roasted chicken, vegetables, bread, a salad, and he suddenly felt conscious of the fact that he hadn't eaten since the granola bar in the car. He ate and watched Charlotte across the table, who ate methodically and looked at her plate more than at them, and he understood that this was difficult for her in ways she wasn't going to name at dinner on the first night. Emma ate and talked about school, about the axolotl project, about the bird in the bird bath, about Professor Buttons, who she'd left upstairs because she wasn't sure about the rules yet. And Charlotte listened. That was the word for it, Logan thought. She listened. Not politely, not with the half attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but with the focused quality of someone who doesn't receive a lot of people talking to them directly. Professor Buttons is a rabbit, Emma clarified. A stuffed one. His name keeps changing. Before Buttons, he was called Desmond for a while because I read a book about a hamster named Desmond. What was the book called? Charlotte asked. Emma blinked. It was called Desmond and the Acorn. It's about this hamster who thinks an acorn is the most important thing in the world and spends the whole book protecting it. And then at the end, he realizes the whole time the important thing was his friends. She paused. I cried a little bit. It sounds like it earned it, Charlotte said. Emma nodded. It did, she said simply. Logan looked down at his plate and didn't say anything. After dinner, he put Emma to bed and she was asleep before he was done reading the first chapter of the Axolotl library book, which had apparently been more tiring than she'd let on. He pulled the blanket up and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her in the room that wasn't hers, in the house that wasn't theirs, sleeping with the uncomplicated trust of someone who believed the person watching over her had it handled. He went downstairs. Charlotte was in a room off the main hall. He'd passed it earlier, assumed it was a library or study. The door was partially open. He knocked on the frame. Come in, she said. She was at a desk near the window, not working. A file was open in front of her, but she hadn't been looking at it. She looked up when he came in. She went to sleep? Charlotte said. Yeah. Axolotls put her out. The corner of Charlotte's mouth moved. She's a very direct child. I know. Sorry if she was... Don't apologize, Charlotte said. I don't mind direct. She looked at him. How are you settling in? Fine, Logan said. It's a good room. Mrs. Aldridge can adjust anything if you need something different. It's fine, he said. And then, because he'd been thinking about it during dinner and not asking, felt dishonest. Can I ask you something? Charlotte put her pen down. Go ahead. The desk in your office this morning, he said. The one in the corner. Looked like you hadn't used it in a while. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. I haven't. Why not? It's not ergonomically suited to the chair, she said. I had a different desk before the accident. The replacement works better. How long ago was the accident? 14 months. Logan nodded slowly. And the therapy? He stopped. It was too soon for this. He'd been here for 4 hours. What about it? She said, and her voice had leveled out the way a road levels just before it ends. Nothing, he said. Never mind. I'll let you get back to your work. He was almost to the door when she said, I stopped going. He turned around. She was looking at the file in front of her, not at him. Physical therapy. I stopped going 8 weeks ago. Why? She was quiet long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, because they kept telling me to be patient, and I am not a patient person, and I'd rather deal with the alternative than spend another Tuesday being told my progress is good when I can see perfectly well that it isn't. Logan stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame. What does the alternative look like? Exactly what you see, she said. I manage. This works. Does it? She looked up at him then, and there was a flatness in her expression that was close to warning. Good night, Logan. He understood a door closing when he heard it. Good night, Charlotte, he said, and left her to her file in her empty corner desk. He lay awake for a long time in the unfamiliar room, listening to the house settle around him. It was an old house, and old houses talk to themselves at night. Pipes, floors, wind through gaps somewhere. He listened and thought about Charlotte Vaughn saying I'd rather deal with the alternative, and the set of her shoulders when she'd said it, and he thought about Emma saying that seems lonely, and he thought about the axolotl that could regrow its limbs if it lost them, and how Emma thought that was amazing, and he supposed he agreed. He was asleep before midnight for the first time in months. The first week was about learning where the edges were, not the physical edges. Those Logan figured out fast enough, the doorways Charlotte could navigate without asking, the rooms she preferred, the hours Mrs. Aldridge arrived and left. Those were the visible logistics, and visible logistics were manageable. What took longer to map were the invisible ones, what Charlotte would tolerate and what she wouldn't, where conversation was welcome and where it was a door she'd already closed without telling you. She was up before him every morning. He'd come down at 6:30, and she'd already be at the working desk in the study, coffee at her elbow, file open, her face in the particular focused arrangement of someone who'd been at it for a while. She didn't say good morning the first day. The second day she glanced up and nodded. By Thursday she said, "Coffee's fresh," without looking away from her screen, and Logan understood that this was, in Charlotte's architecture, something close to warmth. Emma had no such adjustment period. By day 3, she had colonized the window seat in the upstairs sitting room and dragged a side table next to it to hold her library books. And by day 5, she had figured out that Charlotte's study had the best light in the afternoon and started doing her homework in there, setting herself up at the far end of the long table without asking, apparently operating on the theory that it was easier to get forgiveness than permission. Logan found out when Mrs. Aldridge mentioned it, casually, while he was unloading groceries. "Did Ms. Vaughn say anything?" he asked. "She moved Emma's pencil case out of the way of her files," Mrs. Aldridge said, and then asked her what she was working on. Logan stood there with a can of soup in his hand. And Emma explained the axolotl project for approximately 11 minutes, Mrs. Aldridge said. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were not. Ms. Vaughn listened to all of it. He thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. The public appearances had started in the second week, a dinner with 2 of Charlotte's senior partners, cautious men in expensive suits who shook Logan's hand and assessed him with the polite thoroughness of people who assess things professionally. He wore the one good blazer he owned, which was at least 2 years old and slightly wrong in the shoulders, and Charlotte, seated beside him, did not comment on any of this. She introduced him as her husband. The word still sat strange in his mouth when he had to use it, a borrowed thing that didn't quite fit. And she was smooth and composed and utterly readable only if you knew to watch for the moments when she stopped talking and let him fill the space. He filled it. He was better at conversation than he'd expected to be, in the specific way that people who've worked customer-facing jobs learn to talk to anyone about anything. The senior partners seemed satisfied, or at least not suspicious, and when they were in the car going home afterward, Charlotte said, "That went well." And Logan said, "They were trying to figure out if I was an idiot." And Charlotte said, "Yes." And then, after a beat, "You're not." He glanced at her. High praise. "I'm not in the habit of offering it," she said, and turned to look out the window, and that was the end of that. But something had shifted in small ways. He started to notice the shape of her days, the hours she was sharpest, the hours she went quiet, the particular way she held herself when she was in pain, but not going to say so. That last one took him a while to identify. It was subtle, a stillness around the jaw, a way of placing her hands that was slightly too controlled. He'd seen something similar in Karen during the last year, and the recognition hit him like unexpectedly cold water, something he hadn't prepared himself for. He didn't say anything. He was aware he'd overreached on the first night, asking about the therapy, and she'd let him know the boundary in terms that were clear without being cruel. He filed the observation away instead and watched. What he was less prepared for was watching Charlotte with Emma. It happened gradually, the way things do when neither person is trying for them to happen. Emma didn't approach Charlotte with the self-consciousness that adults brought to the wheelchair, the slightly elevated gentleness, the compensation. She approached her the same way she approached everything, directly, with whatever was currently on her mind. "Do you like birds?" Emma asked one morning at breakfast, out of nowhere. Charlotte looked up. "In what sense?" "Like, as animals. Do you find them interesting or not really?" "I find some of them interesting," Charlotte said carefully. "Hawks." Emma nodded with the air of someone filing information. "The bird in the bird bath is a song sparrow. I looked it up." She paused. "It comes back every morning. Same time, around 7:15. Charlotte looked at her for a moment. "You've been tracking it." "I like knowing what things are," Emma said, and went back to her toast. Later that same week, Logan was coming down the main hall when he heard Charlotte's voice from the study. Not the focused, clipped voice she used on calls, something different, lower. He slowed without meaning to. "It's the cartilage," Charlotte was saying, "in the tail. That's the part that takes longest to regenerate." And Emma, "How long?" "Months sometimes, but it comes back, completely." "That's the amazing part," Emma said. "It's not like it just kind of grows back. It grows back exactly, like the original was a blueprint." "The original is a blueprint," Charlotte said. "That's what DNA is, in the simplest sense." A pause. Then Emma, "Can humans regrow things?" A longer pause. "Not the way axolotls can," Charlotte said. "But we heal. It's slower and messier, and it doesn't always go back to exactly what it was." Another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed slightly, flatter. "But it happens." Logan stood in the hall for another second and then walked past the door and into the kitchen and stood at the counter, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. The issue with the therapy came up again, not because he brought it up, he'd decided not to, but because he walked past the room Charlotte used for medical equipment on a Wednesday afternoon, and the door was open and he could see, from the angle, that the parallel bars and the standing frame in the corner were dusty. Not recently unused, months unused. He kept walking. That night, though, when Emma was in bed and he was cleaning up the kitchen and Charlotte was in the study, he carried 2 cups of coffee in and set one on her desk without being asked. He'd noticed she hit a wall around 8:30 and the coffee helped, and she looked up and said, "Thank you." And then he sat in the chair across from her and said, "I'm not going to push you. I just want to say one thing, and then I'll drop it." Charlotte held her coffee cup and waited. "I've watched someone stop fighting," he said. "I know what that looks like, and I know what it costs, and I know why people do it. It's not weakness, it's exhaustion." He paused. "But I also know what it looks like on the other end. What staying stopped does." Charlotte didn't say anything for a long time. She was looking at the surface of her desk, not at him. "One of my therapists told me I was doing well," she said finally. "She said that so many times I started to think she was measuring against a metric I couldn't see, because from where I was sitting, I wasn't doing well. I was doing the same thing every session and not getting anywhere and going home every Tuesday feeling worse than when I arrived." She picked up her coffee cup. "At some point, the cost of going started outweighing the cost of not going." "That makes sense," Logan said. She looked up. Apparently she'd been expecting an argument. "It makes sense," he repeated. "I'm not saying it was the wrong call for then. I'm saying it might be worth looking at again." She looked at him. He held the look without pushing it further. He'd meant it when he said he'd drop it. And after a moment, she said, "I'll think about it," in the tone of someone who means it and doesn't want to mean it. "That's enough," he said, and stood up and took his coffee back to the kitchen. The next thing that happened was not what he expected. He'd been at the estate for 12 days when Charlotte's corporate assistant called his cell. Charlotte had apparently given him Logan's number without mentioning it to confirm the details of an upcoming shareholders event. Medium-sized function, formal attire, 3 weeks out. Logan said he'd be there and hung up, and then went to find Charlotte. She was in the garden, which surprised him. He hadn't seen her out there before. She was at the far end of the stone path where the garden opened into a wider flat area, chair still, looking at the old oak at the property's edge. The afternoon was cool and bright, and she hadn't brought a jacket, which Logan noted. "Your assistant called," he said. Shareholders event in 3 weeks. I know. He came to stand a few feet away, not directly beside her. He'd learned she didn't like people standing directly over her without being invited. Anything I need to know about it? Vincent Hale will be there, she said. It was the first time she'd said the name directly to him. She'd referenced him in the contract documents, and Mrs. Aldridge had mentioned him once in passing, but Charlotte had not spoken his name in Logan's presence before now. He understood from the way she said it, flat, careful, the same control as her pain voice, that this was significant. Tell me about him, Logan said. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then, he's been on the board for 6 years. He came in as a strategic consultant. My father hired him, which my father regretted before he got sick but didn't have the energy left to undo. He's been positioning himself for 3 years to take the company apart and sell the components. He thinks my father's model is outdated. She paused. He also thinks I'm a temporary inconvenience, a paperwork problem. Is he smart? Very. Does he know about us? He suspects something, she said. He's been suspicious since the announcement. He has people, not illegally, just socially, the way people like him operate. He talks to people who talk to people. She turned her chair slightly to look at Logan. The event is an opportunity for us to be visible, consistent. If we're convincing enough in the right room, it takes one weapon out of his hands. Convincing enough, Logan repeated. We need to look like people who chose each other, she said. Logan looked at her in the afternoon light, at the careful stillness of her face and the hands that were always slightly too controlled, and said, That shouldn't be too hard. She held his gaze, something unreadable passing through her expression. No, she said after a beat. I suppose not. She turned back toward the oak. We should go in. You don't have a jacket either. They went in. Dinner that evening was easier than it had been. Something about the conversation in the garden had shifted something, loosened something, in the same way that saying a hard thing out loud makes it slightly less heavy to carry. Emma was in a bright mood because she'd gotten her axolotl report back with a sticker that said, Outstanding Researcher. And she'd been insufferably pleased about it all afternoon in a way that was completely charming. My teacher said I should enter the science fair, she announced, serving herself more rice with the focused care of someone operating adult equipment they're not entirely sure about. Do you want to? Charlotte asked. I want to win, Emma said, without hesitation. Charlotte's expression did the thing again. The quick softening, just a flicker. Then you should enter, she said. What was it like when you were in school? Emma asked. She addressed this to Charlotte as naturally as if she'd been talking to her for years, which Logan supposed at this point was close to accurate. Charlotte blinked. It was the first time he'd seen her look slightly off balance. What do you mean? Like, were you good at school? Did you like it? I was. Yes, Charlotte said. I was good at it. I liked math. I liked things that had right answers. I like math too, Emma said. But I also like things that don't have right answers. Like what animals are the most interesting? That doesn't have a right answer, but you can still think carefully about it. That's a very sophisticated point, Charlotte said. Emma shrugged. My dad taught me that. He says some questions are about thinking carefully, not getting right. Logan looked at his plate. Your father's right, Charlotte said quietly. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to her rice. Charlotte looked up at that moment and caught Logan's eye across the table, and neither of them said anything, and it was somehow enough. He was washing dishes at 9 o'clock. Charlotte didn't have a dishwasher, which had surprised him, and Mrs. Aldridge didn't stay past 7. When Charlotte came into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. I made an appointment, she said. He turned around. With the physical therapist, she said, for next Tuesday. Logan looked at her. She was looking at the counter, not at him, in the way she had when something cost her, and she didn't want anyone to see the cost. Good, he said. I'm not making any promises about how it goes. I'm not asking for any. She nodded once. All right. She turned the chair toward the hall and then paused without turning back. The coffee earlier. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said. I noticed, she said, and left. Logan turned back to the dishes. Outside the kitchen window, the garden was dark. And somewhere out there, the song sparrow was roosting in whatever song sparrows roost in, and the old oak was doing its slow, patient work at the edge of the property, and the house settled around him with its familiar nighttime sounds. And he stood at the sink until the dishes were done and the water ran cool, and he realized, somewhere in the middle of it, that he hadn't thought about the money once all day. That wasn't what scared him. What scared him was that he hadn't thought about going home either. Tuesday came and Charlotte went to therapy and didn't say a word about it when she got back. Logan didn't ask. He'd made dinner, something actual, not just pasta. He'd been slowly working his way through the kitchen's potential, and Emma was setting the table with the particular theatrical care she applied to tasks she'd decided were important. And when Charlotte came through the door at 5:40, she looked at the table and then at Logan, and he just said, "Sit down, it's almost ready." And she sat down. She ate more than usual that night. He noticed. The second Tuesday, she came back looking like she'd been in a fight. Not hurt, but worked over. That specific exhaustion of having pushed something that pushed back. She came into the kitchen where Logan was helping Emma with a multiplication worksheet, and she didn't say anything, just opened the refrigerator and stood there looking at its contents, the way he used to do in his own kitchen when he needed something to do with his hands. "There's chicken left over from lunch," he said, without looking up from Emma's worksheet. "I'm not hungry." "Then eat something small anyway." A pause. "You're not my—" She stopped. "I know," he said. "Eat something small anyway." She made herself a plate. She sat at the kitchen counter instead of the dining room, which was new, and ate standing or sitting, with the plate pulled close, and Emma looked up from her worksheet and said, "Are you okay?" with the directness she reserved for things she actually wanted to know. Charlotte looked at Emma. "Sore," she said. "My dad says sore means it's working," Emma said. "Your dad says a lot of things." "He's usually right," Emma said, and went back to her multiplication. Logan kept his eyes on the worksheet and did not so much mess. By the third week, the shape of things had changed in ways that were hard to point to directly. Charlotte started taking her morning coffee in the kitchen instead of the study, which meant she was there when Emma came down for breakfast, which meant Emma talked at her for 20 minutes before school every morning about whatever was currently living in her head. Charlotte endured this with what Logan gradually understood was not endurance at all, but a form of attention she didn't give to most people. She asked follow-up questions. She remembered things Emma had said 2 days ago and referenced them, which Emma noticed with unconcealed pleasure. She remembered about the science fair, Emma told Logan one morning in the car. "I know." She asked if I'd decided on my hypothesis yet. "Have you?" "I'm still thinking," Emma said. But she said a good hypothesis is one you actually want to know the answer to, not one you think you're supposed to want to know. That's good advice. "Yeah," Logan said. "It is." "She's smart," Emma said, with the tone of a verdict. "Very smart," Logan agreed. "And sad," Emma said, "but less than before." Logan looked at the road. "Yeah," he said after a moment, "less than before." The shareholders' event was on a Friday. Logan wore a suit he'd bought the week before. He'd needed to, the blazer wasn't enough for this. And he'd gone alone to the men's store downtown and spent 40 minutes with a salesman who was patient about budget in a way that cost Logan no dignity, which he appreciated. The suit was dark navy, simple, and when he came downstairs, Charlotte looked at him and said, "Good," which he had learned by now was a significant compliment. Charlotte wore dark red. He hadn't seen her in anything other than blazers and sweaters, and the shift was striking not because she looked different, but because she looked the same, that same deliberate stillness, but in a register that said something more formal about who she was. Her hair was down. He hadn't seen that before either. "You look—" he started. "Don't," she said, but not harshly. "I was going to say capable," he said. She looked at him. "Liar." "Partially," he admitted. Something flickered in her expression that was close to a smile. "Let's go," she said. The event was held in the top-floor ballroom of a hotel downtown, the kind of space that exists to impress people who are hard to impress. 200 people in formal wear, soft lighting, the clink of glasses, a string quartet in the corner doing quiet work. Logan stayed close to Charlotte without hovering. He'd figured out the geometry of this, staying at her shoulder level, slightly back, present, without being a shadow. He saw Vincent Hale within the first 15 minutes. He knew him from the photos Charlotte had shown him during their preparation session the week before. An evening they'd spent at the study table with dossiers and event lists, Charlotte explaining the social architecture of her company with the thoroughness of a military briefing. Hale was 60, silver-haired, the kind of man who'd learned that moving slowly in a room was its own form of power. He looked at everything and seemed to see more than he looked at. He made his way to them within 20 minutes of their arrival. Logan had expected it. "Charlotte," Hale said, with the warmth of a man who'd practiced warmth, "you look wonderful." "Vincent," Charlotte said, "you know Logan." "I've heard a great deal," Hale said, turning to Logan with the smile still in place. He shook Logan's hand with the precise pressure of someone who knew exactly what they were doing with a handshake. "Congratulations on the marriage. Quite a surprise." "Good things usually are," Logan said. Hale's smile widened a millimeter. "Indeed." He looked between them. "I'm sorry I missed the ceremony. A small affair, I understand." "We're private people," Charlotte said. "Of course." Hale's eyes moved over Logan with the thoroughness of an inventory. "And what is it you do, Logan?" "Distribution management," Logan said, which was technically true. "Ah." Hale nodded with the interested expression of someone who isn't interested. "And before Charlotte? Had you followed the investment sector at all?" "Not really," Logan said. "Different world." "It is," Hale agreed pleasantly. "Quite a different world." A pause then directed at Charlotte. "The Meridian portfolio review is moving to next week, by the way. I sent the board a note this morning." Charlotte's expression didn't change. "I saw it." "Good, good. We'll want your full attention, of course. A lot of moving parts." He smiled again. "Enjoy the evening." He moved away. Charlotte didn't watch him go. Logan did briefly, and then looked at Charlotte. "He moved the meeting up," she said, low. "I caught that." "He does that, compresses timelines, makes people respond instead of act." She took a careful breath through her nose. "I need to talk to Brennan." She started to move the chair and then stopped. "You'll be—" "I'm fine," Logan said. "Go." She went. Logan stood where he was for a moment, then moved toward the bar, got a club soda, and did what he was actually good at in rooms like this, which was listening. He talked to a woman who handled international accounts and was sharp and funny and grateful to talk to someone who wasn't working an angle. He talked to a younger analyst who was nervous and had champagne bubbles going to his head, and Logan steered him toward the shrimp and suggested he drink some water. He talked to a board member named Gerald, who turned out to have a 7-year-old granddaughter and spent 10 minutes telling Logan about her science fair project. "My daughter's working on one too," Logan said. "What's the topic?" "Axolotl regeneration." Gerald blinked. "That's impressive for a 7-year-old." "She's impressive," Logan said simply. He found Charlotte again an hour later. She was in conversation with a cluster of investors and holding the room the way he'd seen her hold the dinner table. That focused, still quality that wasn't coldness, but was so disciplined it looked like it. He stood at the edge of the group and watched her work and thought, she's good at this. She was very good at this, in a way that probably nobody adequately acknowledged because the wheelchair drew their eyes, and she'd learned to let people underestimate the steadiness of the mind behind it. On the drive back, she was quiet for a long time. Then, Hale talked to 2 board members after he spoke to us, Erickson and Park. "I know, I watched." She turned her head. "You watched?" "Not obviously, but yes." She was quiet again, looking out the window. "He's building something. He's been building it for weeks, but tonight moved faster than I expected." "What does he need?" "Doubt," she said. "He needs them to doubt me. To doubt the marriage, doubt my judgment, doubt whether I'm the right person to lead this company into the next cycle." She paused. "The marriage announcement bought me 3 weeks of goodwill. He's been spending it down ever since." "What does he have?" She turned from the window and looked at him directly, which she didn't always do in cars. Usually she looked ahead. "He has everything," she said. "About you, the debt, the warehouse job, the foreclosure notice. He's had someone looking." Logan processed that without reacting visibly, which cost him something. "How long have you known?" he said. 2 weeks. He turned to look at her. "You didn't say anything." "I didn't think it would move this fast," she said. "I was managing it. By yourself." "That's how I manage things," she said, and there was something defensive in it, reflexive, the sound of someone who'd been doing everything alone for long enough that they'd stopped noticing. He turned back to the road. They were 20 minutes from home. He was aware of the controlled quality in his own breathing, the effort it took not to say something that was more than the moment deserved. "Next time something affects both of us," he said, "you tell me." She didn't argue. That, in itself, meant something. 3 days later, the board meeting happened, and it was worse than either of them had anticipated. Charlotte had prepared. He'd sat with her 2 evenings in the study, watching her go through materials with the focused intensity of someone who builds defensive structures for a living, anticipating angles, preparing responses. She was thorough. She was ready. What she wasn't ready for, what neither of them were ready for, was the room itself. Logan wasn't in the meeting. Spouses weren't invited to board meetings. He'd known that. He drove Emma to school and came back to the house and sat in the kitchen with his coffee going cold, watching the clock. Charlotte had been in that room for 40 minutes when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't pick up. "Mr. Mercer," said a man's voice, "my name isn't important. I'm calling to let you know that documents pertaining to your financial situation are being distributed to board members right now. Bank records, the foreclosure filing, pay stubs from the warehouse." A pause. "I thought you'd want to know." The line went dead. Logan sat with the dead phone for 3 seconds. Then he was on his feet and his keys were in his hand and he was out the door. He'd never been inside the Vaughn Capitol building before. Charlotte had her own entrance, a ground floor access point that avoided the lobby's steps. He knew it from the 3 times he'd dropped her off. He used it now, walked through a corridor he'd only seen from outside, and found the elevator. 18th floor. He'd been here before. The receptionist outside the boardroom looked up when he came down the hall, her face shifting into the particular expression of someone assessing a threat. "I need to go in," Logan said. "Sir, the board is in session." "I know." He was at the door. "I'm going in." He opened it. The room was large, oval table, 12 people, and Charlotte at one end in the space they'd left for her chair. Every face turned when the door opened. Logan took in the room in a second. The faces, the papers in front of several board members, Charlotte's expression, which was the most controlled thing in the room and therefore the most alarming. Vincent Hale was seated to Charlotte's left, 2 positions down. He looked at Logan with an expression of pure patient satisfaction that Logan was going to remember for a long time. "This is a closed meeting," said a board member Logan didn't know. "I know," Logan said. He looked at Charlotte. Her expression said, "You shouldn't be here." Under that, something else he couldn't read quickly enough. "I'll be brief," he said, to the room. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. "I understand you've been given some information about my background." He let that sit for a second. "It's accurate. I had a wife who was sick for 3 years and died 14 months ago. The medical debt is real. The foreclosure notice is real. The warehouse job is real." He let that sit too. "I'm not going to stand here and defend any of that. It happened, and I'd do it all again." The room was quiet. "What I will tell you," he said, "is what I've watched Charlotte Vaughn do in the last 3 weeks. Because I don't think most of you have seen it." He paused. Not for drama, because he was choosing words carefully, and he needed a moment to choose them. "She keeps 3 files on her desk that she reads every morning before she does anything else. One of them is flagged reports from your junior analysts. Not the senior reports, the junior ones. The people who don't usually get read at the top. She reads them because she says junior analysts see things differently, and she doesn't want to miss what they're seeing." He kept his voice level. "She has a call every Thursday with a fund manager named Patricia Osei in Atlanta who's been with this company for 12 years and is apparently brilliant and also apparently never gets called by corporate. Charlotte calls her every week, just to talk through things, just to make sure Patricia knows she's valued." He paused again. "I didn't know any of this before I came into her house. She never mentioned it. Those are just things she does quietly because she thinks they matter." He looked around the table. Erickson and Park, the two Hale had worked on at the event, were both looking at him carefully. "The arrangement between us is unusual," he said. "I know how it looks. You've been handed documents designed to make you see a transaction, a desperate man, and a convenient contract." He glanced at Hale briefly, without heat. "I can't make you see something different, but I'm asking you to ask yourselves what you actually know about the person who's been running this company for the last 2 years. What you've seen, what she's done, not what somebody handed you in a file this morning." He stopped talking. The room was very quiet. He looked at Charlotte. She was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her before, something open and unguarded and slightly frightened, and he held her gaze for a moment and then looked at the door. "I'll let you get back to your meeting," he said. He walked out. He closed the door behind him. He walked back down the corridor to the elevator and stood in it going down, watching the floor numbers drop, and by the time he reached the ground floor, his hands had stopped shaking enough that it didn't show. He sat in his car in the parking structure for a while. His phone was in his lap. He didn't look at it. 22 minutes later, Charlotte called. "The meeting adjourned," she said. "And?" A pause. Erickson asked Hale to clarify the source of the documents he'd distributed. Hale said they came through legitimate channels. Erickson asked which channels. Hale said he'd provide that in writing. Another pause. Hale doesn't like being asked to provide things in writing. What did the board do? They tabled the vote he'd been pushing for. They want more time. She stopped. "Logan." "Yeah." "You could have made that worse," she said. "Coming in like that. It could have gone very badly." "I know." "Why did you do it?" He thought about it honestly, sitting in the dim of the parking structure with his phone pressed to his ear. "Because someone was using things that happened to me to hurt you," he said. "And I didn't like it." Silence on the line. Then, very quietly, "Thank you." "You should have told me about the documents," he said. "I know." A pause. "I know, Logan." He started the car. "I'll be home in 20 minutes. Emma has drama club until 4. "Okay," she said, and her voice was different from any way he'd heard it before. Smaller, somehow, like something had been set down that she'd been carrying a long time. "Charlotte." "Yes." "The thing you said that first day. That you'd rather deal with the alternative than keep fighting. I want you to think about what the alternative actually looks like. Not from the outside. From the inside." He paused. "Because I don't think you want it. I think you're scared that you'll fight and not get back what you lost. And I think that's different from not wanting to fight." Nothing on the line for a long moment. "Drive safely," she said finally. He pulled out of the parking structure into the afternoon light. The city was doing what cities did in the middle of the day, moving and insensible, and he drove through it thinking about 12 people sitting around an oval table, and Charlotte's face when he'd come through that door, open in a way he'd never seen it, and Hale's expression of patient satisfaction that had shifted, by the end, into something less settled. It wasn't over. He understood that clearly. What had happened today wasn't a victory. It was a delay. And delays only meant something if you used the time. But Charlotte had said okay in a voice that sounded like a person who'd been holding a door closed for a long time and had just, finally, taken her hand off it. He drove home through the afternoon light, and he didn't try to make that mean more than it was, and he didn't try to make it mean less. The days after the board meeting moved differently than the ones before it. Something had cracked open in the architecture of the house. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the small daily ways that matter more than announcements. Charlotte started leaving her study door fully open instead of half closed. She stopped eating dinner at the precise remove she'd maintained the first week, that careful distance that said, "I am here, but I am not participating," and started actually being at the table in the way that meant something, asking Emma follow-up questions, pushing back on things Logan said, once getting into a 20-minute disagreement with him about whether the warehouse industry was going to survive the next decade of automation that got heated enough that Emma looked between them with wide eyes and then said, "I think you're both right about different things," which was so accurate it stopped the argument cold. Charlotte looked at Emma, then at Logan. "She's going to be formidable," she said. "I know," Logan said. "It's terrifying." Emma looked pleased. But the shift wasn't just in the warmth of small moments. Charlotte was working harder and in a different direction than before. Logan could see it in the hours she kept, the calls she made, the files that multiplied on her desk in organized stacks that meant forward motion rather than maintenance. She was going on offense quietly, in the way of someone who has decided to stop waiting to be attacked and start deciding the terrain. She called Patricia Osei in Atlanta twice that week instead of once. Logan heard the second call from the hall, not the content, just the cadence, Charlotte's voice more animated than usual, and Osei's voice through the speaker confident and warm. Afterward, Charlotte came out of the study and looked at Logan and said, "Patricia's coming to the city next week. I want her to meet with Erickson and Park directly." "Good idea," Logan said. "I should have done it a year ago," Charlotte said, and moved on before he could respond, which was how she handled admissions. Said them, and kept going, didn't linger in them long enough for them to become things people could say back to her. The physical therapy was its own separate narrative running alongside everything else. Charlotte went Tuesdays and Thursdays now, and she didn't talk about it in detail, but Logan noticed the evidence. The way she held herself was incrementally, almost imperceptibly different. A slightly different angle when she reached for something. A quality of deliberateness to small movements that looked like the early rehearsal of something larger. He didn't track it out loud. He tracked it quietly. The way you track things you're invested in, but don't want to jinx by naming too directly. On a Thursday evening, 3 days after the board meeting, he was in the back corridor near the medical equipment room, looking for an extension cord that Mrs. Aldridge had mentioned might be stored there, and the door was open, and he stopped. Charlotte was standing, not fully, not without support, both hands on the parallel bars, weight distributed in the way that clearly cost something, her jaw set with the effort. Her physical therapist, a compact woman Logan had met briefly once in the driveway, was standing a few feet away with her arms at her sides, not touching, not hovering, just watching with the alert patience of someone who knows that the only thing that matters right now is the person in front of them. Charlotte hadn't seen him. He watched for 3 seconds. That was all. 3 seconds, long enough to register what he was seeing, and then he moved away from the door silently and went back to the main house and stood in the kitchen for a while doing nothing, just breathing. He found the extension cord later in a hall closet. He didn't mention what he'd seen. She told him herself 2 days later on a Saturday morning. Emma was at a classmate's birthday party, and the house was quiet, in the particular way it got when Emma wasn't in it, a kind of acoustic absence. Charlotte came into the kitchen at 9 and poured coffee and said, without looking at him, "I stood yesterday for 6 minutes." Logan kept his eyes on the counter. "How'd it feel?" "Like being stabbed from the inside," she said. "Also like I earned the right to use my own legs again, both simultaneously." She picked up her mug. "My therapist says the nerve pathway is there. It's been there. My body knows what it's supposed to do." "Then what's the problem been?" She was quiet for a moment. "Fear," she said, with the tone of someone who has paid actual money to finally admit this. "That if I try and it doesn't come back completely, I'll have worked for something that only shows me what I can't have." She looked at her coffee. "It's easier not to know." "Until it isn't," Logan said. "Until it isn't," she agreed. He poured himself a second cup. 6 minutes is real." 6 minutes is nothing in normal terms," she said. "I know, it's still real." She looked at him then, sideways, the way she did when she was assessing something she wasn't sure about yet. "You're not going to make a thing of this," she said. "No." "Good." She drank her coffee. "I don't want a thing made of it." "I know," he said. "You want to just do it." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said simply. The legal action from Hale came that same week. Logan heard about it from Charlotte on a Monday morning before Emma was up. She'd gotten the filing the night before and hadn't said anything until now, sitting at the breakfast table with the filing pulled up on her laptop, turning it to show him. It was dense, legal language stacked on legal language, but the shape of it was clear enough. Hale was filing a formal challenge to the marriage's validity, arguing it was a contractual arrangement rather than a genuine union, and requesting an emergency injunction to freeze Charlotte's voting shares pending investigation. If the injunction was granted, Even temporarily, the upcoming vote Charlotte had been preparing for would go to the committee, meaning Hale. "How long do we have?" Logan asked. "The hearing is in 12 days, Charlotte said. "What do your lawyers say?" "That it's aggressive and it's not without basis, and that the outcome depends significantly on what evidence they can produce that the marriage is contractual." She closed the laptop. "Which means it depends on whether anyone talked." Logan thought through the people who knew, Charlotte's attorneys, who were bound by privilege. Mrs. Aldridge, who had worked for the Vaughn family for 19 years and had a face that gave nothing away. Darlene Cho, who had made the referral and knew the general situation. And Dale, Logan's supervisor at the warehouse, who knew nothing beyond the fact that Logan had been going through changes. "No one talked," Logan said. "Not deliberately. But Hales had someone working this since the beginning. He may have pieced it together." "He has the financial records," Charlotte said. "He has the timeline. She saw, we married very quickly. We had no public relationship before the announcement. That's circumstantial, but it's not nothing." "What does your lawyer recommend?" "Full disclosure of the living arrangement," she said. "Our attorneys argue that a contractual marriage isn't inherently invalid, that plenty of arranged marriages are legally recognized. The challenge is the specific clause in the inheritance terms. My father's attorneys built language into the estate that requires the marriage to be made in good faith, not as a legal instrument." She paused. "That phrase, good faith, is what Hale is pulling on." Logan was quiet, looking at the closed laptop. "Good faith," he repeated. "Yes." He looked up at her. She was watching him with the still expression she used when she was waiting for something she wasn't sure she wanted. "Is it?" he said. She held his gaze. "Is it what?" "Good faith." A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. From upstairs he heard the sound of Emma's alarm going off. A song she'd chosen herself. Something cheerful and slightly too loud that he'd stopped finding annoying. "I think it became that," Charlotte said quietly. "Somewhere in the middle." He nodded slowly. "Then that's what we say." The 12 days before the hearing were the most concentrated of the 6 weeks. Charlotte's attorneys prepared aggressively. Patricia Osei flew in and met with Erickson and Park over 2 separate lunches. And whatever she told them, and Logan didn't ask because it wasn't his business, changed the temperature with both of them in ways that showed up in small signals Logan had learned to read. Erickson called Charlotte directly. Park sent a letter to Hale's attorneys requesting documentation on the source of the financial records, which Hale's team had thus far declined to produce. Charlotte met with 3 shareholders herself, in person, which Logan understood was unusual for her. She typically worked through intermediaries, through calls and reports and the structures of formal corporate communication. Going in person was a choice, and it cost her something, the exposure of it, the visibility, and he watched her prepare for each meeting with the particular focus of someone who's doing the harder thing on purpose. He drove her to one of them. She'd have normally taken a car service, but her usual driver was unavailable, and she'd asked Logan without making a production of asking, just, "Are you free at 2?" On the way, she was quiet, going through notes on her phone. He didn't push conversation, but on the way back, she put the phone in her lap and looked out the window and said, "My father used to say the most important thing in running a company isn't the decisions you make when everything's going well." "What is it?" Logan said. "Whether the people around you believe you'll still be standing when everything isn't." She paused. He was testing for that, the marriage clause. I hated him for it for a long time, but I think he saw something coming. Not this specifically, but something. He knew what Hale was. "Did you know? Before the accident?" "I knew Hale was self-serving. I didn't know how patient he was." She turned from the window. Patient is more dangerous than aggressive. Aggressive shows its hand. Logan thought about Hale at the shareholders' event, the way he'd move through the room, the measured handshake, the smile. "He's been waiting for you to make a mistake." "Or for circumstances to make one for me," Charlotte said. "He's good at helping circumstances along." "Is that where the financial records came from?" She looked at him. "His people didn't steal them. They're public through the foreclosure filing. He just assembled them and used them at the right moment." A pause. "That's what makes him difficult. He doesn't do illegal things. He does legal things at precisely calculated times for maximum damage. Until he does something illegal, Logan said. Charlotte looked at him. What do you mean? He moved the board meeting timeline. He distributed those documents. He filed this challenge. Logan kept his eyes on the road. People who are that methodical eventually get impatient. When they're close to winning, they stop being careful. But Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. He's been pressuring a junior analyst named Kevin Marsh for 3 months, she said finally. I only found out last week. Marsh came to me directly. Hale's been asking him to flag irregularities in our quarterly reports. Not real ones, just framed ones. Questions designed to look like red flags that aren't actually red flags if you know what you're looking at. That's not legal, Logan said. No, Charlotte said. It isn't. Does Marsh have documentation? He kept everything. A pause. He came to me instead of the board because he didn't know who Hale had reached. Logan absorbed that. That's your case? Part of it, Charlotte said. My attorneys are working with it. The question is timing. If we use it too early, Hale distances himself. If we use it at the hearing, it reframes the entire challenge. You're going to use it at the hearing, Logan said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Charlotte said, and then quietly. I'm also going to speak myself, not through my attorneys, not through a statement. She paused. Directly, to the board. He glanced at her. You sure about that? I've been running this company by being careful, she said, by being managed and strategic and correct. It hasn't been enough. She looked at the road. My father spoke to people, not at them, not through intermediaries, to them. He thought it was the most underrated thing a leader could do. She paused. I didn't inherit that naturally. I'm better on paper than in person. Another pause, smaller. I'm working on it. Logan looked at the road for a moment. You were in person with me, he said, the first day. You could have had your attorneys run that meeting. You didn't. She was quiet. You came yourself, he said. That's why I came back. She didn't answer for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to. Then, I was desperate enough that day to be honest, she said. I've been trying to get back to that. The hearing was on a Wednesday, 11 in the morning, in a conference room at a law firm that was neutral ground. Neither Charlotte's attorneys nor Hale's. Logan wasn't there for that either. His role had been the board meeting. This was her thing to do, and he knew it, and she knew he knew it. And they didn't discuss it beyond Charlotte leaving the house at 9 with her attorneys in a black car and Logan watching from the door and not saying good luck because she'd told him once she didn't believe in luck, only preparation. He took Emma to school. He came back and cleaned the house in a thorough and completely unnecessary way because he needed something to do with his hands. He reorganized the kitchen cabinet that had bothered him for 3 weeks. He fixed the hinge on the garden gate that had been catching wrong since they'd arrived. At 2:15, his phone rang. Charlotte. It's over, she said. Tell me. Marsh testified. His documentation was thorough. Hale had communicated primarily through a secondary email account that Marsh had screenshots of. A breath. The board voted 8-3 to reject Hale's challenge. The injunction was denied. Another breath. 2 of his own aligned members flipped. Logan leaned against the kitchen counter. And Hale? He resigned, Charlotte said. His attorneys informed the board at the close of the session, preemptive before the misconduct finding was formalized. A pause. He's gone. Logan closed his eyes for a second. Charlotte. I know, she said. Are you okay? A pause that went a beat longer than he expected. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I think I need an hour. Take whatever you need, he said. I'll pick Emma up at 3. Logan? Her voice had shifted slightly, quieter. I spoke. To the board. Before the vote. A pause. I said, I told them about the junior analyst's reports, about the Patricia Osei calls, about what I've been trying to build and why it matters. She stopped. I didn't read from notes. He didn't say anything. He let it be what it was. It wasn't smooth, she said. I lost my place once and had to stop and find it again. It wasn't It wasn't polished. Was it true? He said. Yes. Then it was enough. She breathed out slowly, a long exhale that sounded like something being set down. Emma has drama club today? Until 4. Then stop at that bakery on Elm Street on your way home, she said. Emma likes the lemon ones. Get more than she needs. We'll have too many and it won't matter. He smiled without meaning to. Okay. I'll be home by 5, she said, and hung up. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, in the house that had started to feel different from the house he'd walked into 5 weeks ago. Same walls, same floors, same old house sounds, but inhabited differently now, occupied by people who'd stopped being careful with each other in the specific way that people are careful when they don't trust yet. He thought about the contract, 40 pages and a number and a 6-week term, and 1 week remaining on the clock. He thought about Emma in the window seat with her library books. He thought about Charlotte standing at the parallel bars at the end of the back corridor, 6 minutes, jaw set against the effort and the fear both. He thought about Charlotte's voice on the phone just now, saying it wasn't smooth, and meaning it as a confession and a small kind of pride at the same time. He picked up his keys. He stopped at the bakery on Elm Street and got the lemon ones, more than Emma needed because Charlotte had said so, and that was a kind of reason that didn't need explaining. He sat in the car for a moment with the bakery box on the passenger seat, and then he drove to school to get his daughter, and he drove home to the house that wasn't his, where the gate hinge now worked correctly and the kitchen cabinet made sense, and he set the bakery box on the counter and went to the garden to wait. The oak at the far edge of the property was doing its slow, reliable work. The song Sparrow, or one that looked like it, was moving through the garden in the particular way of birds who have claimed a territory and know it well. The afternoon light was the long, flat light of late afternoon, the kind that makes familiar things look briefly like they belong to you. Logan stood in it and didn't try to figure out what he was going to do about the week that was left. There was time for that. For now, there was the light and the oak and the bird and a box of lemon pastries on the counter, and somewhere in the city, Charlotte Vaughn was in a car coming home. And in an elementary school 3 blocks away, Emma was doing whatever Emma did in drama club, probably the same thing she did everywhere, which was being exactly herself without apology. He thought about the card in his pocket, that first night at the kitchen table. 4 words on the back. Come alone. Bring nothing. He'd brought everything, as it turned out. And the strange thing, the thing he hadn't expected, standing here in the borrowed garden of someone else's house with 1 week left on a contract, was that it didn't feel like a mistake. The lemon pastries were gone by 8 o'clock that night. Emma had eaten 2.5 before Logan cut her off on the grounds that sugar this late was a problem for everyone. And Charlotte had eaten 1 with the focused attention she brought to most things. And Logan had eaten 2 without really noticing until they were gone, and what was left of the box sat on the kitchen counter, while the 3 of them were at the table doing what they'd apparently become people who did, sitting together after dinner without any particular agenda, Emma drawing something in the sketchbook she'd started keeping at the estate, Charlotte reading a document she kept setting down, Logan with his coffee going cold in front of him. It was an ordinary evening. It was so ordinary that it took him a moment to recognize what was wrong with it, and then he did. Nothing was wrong with it. It was simply what the last several weeks had slowly become. And tomorrow was Thursday, and the contract ended on Sunday, and he hadn't figured out what to do about that yet. Charlotte set her document down and looked at Emma's sketchbook. What is that? Emma turned the sketchbook around. She'd drawn the garden, or her version of it, which had a very large oak and a very small bird bath, and what appeared to be a sun wearing an expression. It's the garden. I made the sun happy because it was a good day. It was a good day, Charlotte said. You won, Emma said. The company won, Charlotte said. It's different. Emma considered this. Is it? Charlotte looked at her. Yes. The company it belongs to the people who work for it, not just me. She paused, and Logan could see her working through something, finding words for a thing she usually kept in the register of business and not conversation. When your grandfather builds something and puts it in your hands, the job isn't owning it. The job is not breaking it. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, did you almost break it? I came close, Charlotte said. For a while I was more focused on surviving than building. That's not the same thing. Emma nodded slowly, with the seriousness she reserved for information she intended to keep. Then she turned the sketchbook back around and added something to the drawing. Logan couldn't see what from where he was sitting, and said, without looking up, "I'm glad you didn't." Charlotte looked at the table, just for a second. Then she picked up her document again and didn't say anything else, but her hand was slightly less controlled than usual, and Logan looked at his cold coffee and thought about how much damage a person can do to themselves by forgetting what they're actually building toward. He thought about that a lot in the days that followed. Friday passed. Saturday arrived with the particular quality of a day that knows it's being watched. Logan got up early and made breakfast and didn't say anything about Sunday, and Charlotte didn't either, and Emma was blissfully unaware that anything was impending because nobody had told her, which was its own kind of problem that Logan had been putting off solving. He took Emma to the science fair in the morning. She'd entered, and her axolotl regeneration project had a display board that she'd worked on for 2 weeks with a precision that impressed even Charlotte, who had reviewed it twice and suggested one revision to the hypothesis framing that Emma had accepted with the graciousness of someone who knows good advice when they hear it. She won second place, losing to a fourth grader whose project on soil erosion Logan privately thought was less interesting but more visually impressive. Emma accepted the second place ribbon with dignity and said, "The soil erosion one was good," and meant it, which was one of the moments that reminded Logan that whatever he'd managed to do in the last 2 years of single parenting, some of it had worked. He got her home at 2. She went up to the window seat with Professor Buttons and her ribbon and her satisfaction, and Logan went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and thought about Sunday. Charlotte found him there 20 minutes later. She came in and looked at him and said, "You're doing math again." "Dale used to say that," he said. "Who's Dale?" "My supervisor at the warehouse." He paused. "He says I look like I'm doing math when I'm thinking about something I don't want to think about." Charlotte moved to the counter across from him, the width of the kitchen between them. "Sunday," she said. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "I had my attorneys prepare the final payment documents this week. Everything is in order." She said it in the careful voice of someone dismantling something they'd built. "I know," Logan said. "The divorce filing can be initiated Monday morning. Uncontested, expedited. 30 days and it's done." She kept her eyes on the counter between them. "You'd have the full $250. The house is already saved. I had the second installment transferred when the hearing concluded." He hadn't known about the second installment going through early. He filed that away. "Charlotte," he said. "The room will be Emma's," she said. "If you ever... The room upstairs. I'm not going to use it for anything. I'd rather..." She stopped, started again. "She can leave things here. Whatever she wants." "Charlotte." She stopped talking. He looked at her across the kitchen. She was looking at the counter between them with the still face she used when something was costing her, and she wasn't going to let it show. Except that he could see it anyway now because he'd been watching her for 6 weeks, and he knew the difference between her stillness and her control, and this was control working hard. "What do you want?" he said. She looked up. "What?" "Not what the contract says, not what makes sense on paper." He kept his voice even. "What do you want?" She held his gaze for a long moment, then she looked away. "That's not a useful question." "Why not?" "Because what I want and what's reasonable aren't the same thing." "They don't have to be the same thing," he said. "I'm asking what you want." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she was going to retreat into the study and close the door, which was still her move when things got too close. Instead, she stayed where she was, and when she finally spoke, her voice was lower than usual. "I want Emma to keep bringing that sketchbook down to breakfast," she said. "I want to see what she draws." A pause. "I want to keep arguing with you about things that don't matter, supply chains, whether the coffee is better before or after 8, whatever." Another pause. Longer. "I want to see what happens in therapy, whether the 6 minutes becomes 10, whether 10 becomes something else." She stopped. "I want things I don't know how to ask for because I've spent a long time being the person who doesn't need anything from anyone." Logan had been still through all of this. Now he moved around the counter, not fast, and stopped a few feet from her. "I have $7 in my wallet," he said. She blinked. "That's how much I had the night I got your card," he said. $7 and a foreclosure notice and a daughter asking me if we were moving. He paused. I didn't come here because I had good options. I came here because you were the only option. He looked at her. That's how this started. I want you to know I know that. She was watching him carefully. But I've been standing in your garden for a week thinking about what I'd do with a blank slate, he said. If the contract didn't exist, if the money wasn't on the table, if I just met you somewhere, somehow, and got to watch you run a room and argue about coffee and sit with my daughter while she talked about axolotls for 11 minutes. He paused. I think I'd have done the same things. Not because of the contract, just because of you. Charlotte looked at him. Her hands were in her lap, both of them, and for once they were not arranged with any deliberateness. They were just there, open. Logan, she said. I know it's complicated, he said. I know the way this started is going to be a thing we have to carry. I'm not pretending it isn't. He paused. But I've spent 2 years getting up every morning for Emma because she needed me to. That's real, and it's enough, and I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that somewhere in the last 6 weeks, I started getting up because I wanted to see what the day was going to be. Not just for her. He stopped. That hasn't happened in a long time. Charlotte was quiet. Her eyes were bright in a way that she was managing, barely, in the way she managed most things, through will and precision and the refusal to surrender to the moment. Then she said, very quietly, I don't know how to do this. I know, he said. I mean that literally. I've been alone in this house for 14 months, and before that I was running a company, and my idea of personal life was a calendar event. She looked down at her hands. I don't have a template for this. Neither do I, Logan said. My template is 2 years old, and it was never going to apply here anyway. That should be a reason not to try, she said. Yeah, he said. But it's not, for me. Is it for you? She looked up at him. The kitchen was quiet. Upstairs, distantly, Emma was moving around. The soft thump of feet, the particular creaking floorboard near the window seat that Logan had learned to identify. The house doing its ordinary work. No, Charlotte said. It's not. He exhaled slowly. Okay. Okay, she said. And then, with the trace of something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood, this is going to be very disorganized. Probably, he said. I'm not good at disorganized. I know. He looked at her. You've been getting better at it. She did smile then. Small, real, the kind that didn't announce itself. Don't tell anyone, she said. He didn't laugh, but it was close. Sunday came and the contract expired at midnight and nothing changed and everything changed. And neither of them talked about it in the morning because there was breakfast and Emma's ribbon needed to be put somewhere it wouldn't get crumpled. And the song Sparrow was in the bird bath at 7:15 as usual, and there were things to do, ordinary things, the ordinary things a life is made of. What changed was the pace. Without the contract's clock, the days felt different. Not slower exactly, but more inhabited, like rooms that had been furnished finally had someone actually living in them. Logan called Dale on Monday and asked about his position at the warehouse, and Dale, who had more perceptiveness than he usually got credit for, said, You're staying wherever you are, not as a question. For now, Logan said. The holiday hours are still yours if you want them, Dale said. I want them, Logan said. Different situation than before, but I want them. He got his own accounts in order. The mortgage was clear, the debt was settled, and what remained of the $250,000 after those two things was enough to make decisions from instead of react from, which was a different country from where he'd been 3 months ago. He put a portion into Emma's college account. He paid off his car. He sat with what was left and thought about what came next, not with the desperate urgency of someone running out of time, but with the careful attention of someone who finally had room to think. He also, on a Tuesday afternoon, drove back to the house. His house, the one he'd been about to lose. He parked in front of it and sat looking at it for a while. Small, familiar in the specific way of a place that holds a decade of your life in its walls. He'd painted the front door blue the summer before Emma was born. Karen had picked the color. He sat there for about 10 minutes and then he drove back to the estate, and he didn't feel guilty about it, which surprised him. And also didn't. Charlotte didn't ask where he'd been. When he came in, she was on a call, and she looked up when he passed the study and nodded and went back to her call. And that was all. And it was enough. The therapy milestones came in increments that were never as smooth as they sounded. The 6 minutes became 9, and then 9 became 12. And then there was a week where it seemed to go backward. Charlotte came home from Thursday's session with the pain voice and the controlled hands, and when Logan brought coffee into the study, she said flatly, "Don't," and he put the coffee down and left without saying anything, which was the right call. The next day, she came out of the study at 7 in the morning while he was making breakfast and said, "I'm sorry about last night." "You don't have to be," he said. "I was rude. You were in pain and you needed to be alone." He kept his eyes on the eggs. "That's different from rude." She stood in the doorway. "You're frustratingly reasonable sometimes." "I have an 8-year-old," he said. "Reasonable is a survival skill." She moved to the counter and sat in the way she'd started doing in the mornings, the position she'd settled into over the weeks. And he put a cup of coffee in front of her without ceremony, and she picked it up, and they were quiet together in the kitchen while the eggs cooked. And it was the kind of quiet that had taken a while to build and was worth something. The milestone that mattered came 6 weeks after the contract ended, on an ordinary Wednesday. Logan was in the back hallway, the same hallway where he'd stopped that first time and watched through the open door. He was there now because he'd come to check the extension cord he'd used the week before, a practical errand with no other significance. The door was open again. Charlotte was standing, not at the bars this time, not with support. She was standing on her own in the center of the room, both feet on the floor, her weight fully her own, and she was looking at the wall across from her with the expression of someone who is very carefully not celebrating something yet because they don't trust it not to disappear. Her therapist was in the corner of his peripheral vision, very still. Charlotte took a step. It was not a smooth step. It was careful and effortful and slightly wrong in the mechanics of it, the way a first step always is when you've been away from something long enough, when the body has to relearn what it once knew. But it was a step, under her own power, one foot in front of the other, and then she stopped and stood again, breathing, and her face was doing something complicated. The control and the something underneath the control, both of them, right on the surface. Logan stood in the hallway and did not go in and did not make a sound. He stood there and watched and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a word for, something between witnessing and relief and the particular weight of being present for a thing that a person has worked hard for in private, in the unwitnessed hours, in the sessions that went backward and the nights with the pain voice, all of it building to this ordinary, unremarkable room on a Wednesday afternoon with the light coming in flat and honest. She took another step. He turned and walked quietly back down the hall. She told him at dinner. Emma was there, drawing in the sketchbook again. She'd been drawing every night now, a habit that had apparently attached itself to the estate's table the way some habits attach themselves to places. Charlotte looked at her plate for a moment and then said, without preamble, "I walked today, unassisted, 8 steps." Emma looked up from the sketchbook. "Really?" It was slow," Charlotte said, "and I had to stop. It'll be a while before it's anything more than that." 8 steps is a lot," Emma said. "It's not a lot objectively." "Yes, it is," Emma said with the certainty of someone who has done their research. "Axolotls have to regrow every single cell. You just have to retrain what's already there." She paused. "That's easier and harder, because you remember what it was supposed to feel like." Charlotte looked at Emma for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Yes, that's exactly what it is." Logan picked up his fork. He didn't look at either of them because the moment was theirs and it didn't need him in it. "I drew you today," Emma said, turning the sketchbook around. She'd drawn 3 figures, one small, one tall, one in a chair, all with round heads and simple lines. Under the figures she'd written, in her large, careful second-grade handwriting, "Us." Logan looked at the drawing. Charlotte looked at the drawing. The words sat on the page in pencil, 3 letters, a word that had taken the better part of 3 months to become accurate. "Can I have this one?" Charlotte asked. Emma considered it. "I'll make you a better one. I'm getting better at hands." "I want this one," Charlotte said. Emma appeared to weigh the request. "Okay," she said finally, and tore it out carefully along the spiral edge and slid it across the table. Charlotte picked it up and looked at it, and then set it beside her plate and kept eating, and didn't say anything else. And Logan decided that some things were better not commented on, which was itself a thing he'd learned slowly over the course of his life and kept having to relearn. The winter came. Emma turned 8 in November, and the party was at the estate because that was where they were. And there were 7 children in the garden being supervised with varying success by Logan and Mrs. Aldridge, while Charlotte watched from the stone path and twice intervened in disputes with a calm authority that surprised the children into compliance, which was exactly how Charlotte dealt with most things. Afterward, when the children had gone home and Emma was sugar-crashed in the upstairs sitting room with Professor Buttons, Charlotte sat in the garden in the cold with a blanket over her lap, and Logan brought tea out and sat on the stone bench nearby. "You're good with kids," he said. "Not just Emma." "Don't tell anyone that either," she said. "I'm noticing a pattern," he said. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I grew up in this house," she said. "My father's parties were here. There were always children somewhere, and my job was to manage them while the adults talked." She paused. "I was an only child. I was good at playing with children because I spent a lot of time being one alone." He looked at her. "That sounds lonely." "It was," she said, "and also fine, both." He thought about that, about the things that shape you that you can't separate from the things that hurt you, the way they're sometimes the same thing wearing different faces. "Emma wants to come back in the spring," he said. "She mentioned it twice this week, which means she's trying to let the idea settle before she asks directly." He paused. "She has a whole theory about how to ask for things." Charlotte looked at him. "Does she?" "She says if you mention something twice without asking, adults think about it on their own, and then they feel like the yes was their idea." He held his tea. "I've been aware of this strategy for a while. She doesn't know that." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Logan, yeah. I want you to stay," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to say that without it sounding like what it sounded like when I sat across from you at that table with the contract." She looked at her tea. "I don't want you to stay because of the house or money or because it's convenient. I want you to stay because the house makes sense with you in it, and I didn't know it was missing that." He looked at her in the winter garden, with her hands around her mug and the blanket in her lap and the oak at the far edge doing its patient work. "I know the difference," he said, "between you and the table with the contract. I need you to know it." "I do," he said. And then, because she deserved the whole truth and not just the easy half of it, "I'm still figuring out what I am outside of being Emma's dad. 2 years of doing only that, it changes you. I don't have a clean picture of what I want for myself, not yet." "I know," she said. "That's not a no," he said. "I just want to be honest about what I'm bringing." "Honest is what I asked for," she said. "The first day. You asked for trustworthy." "Same thing," she said, "in the ways that matter." He looked at the garden. A bird, not the song sparrow, wrong shape, wrong season, moved through the far end of the property and was gone. The cold was the particular clean cold of late autumn, sharp and without ambiguity. "Spring," he said. She looked at him. "Emma wants to come back in the spring," he said. "She's going to ask. She's going to time it perfectly and make you feel like it was your idea." He paused. "Say yes." Charlotte's expression did the thing, the small, real shift, the smile that didn't announce itself. "I was going to anyway," she said. "I know," he said. "I wanted you to know I know." They sat in the garden in the cold until the tea was gone and the light had finished doing what winter light does in the late afternoon, and then they went inside because it was too cold and there was dinner to make, and a child to wake from her sugar crash, and an ordinary evening waiting in the ordinary house that had become something neither of them had been looking for and both of them had needed. There are things you plan for and things that find you, and the difference between them isn't always clear in the moment. Logan had walked into a building on Meridian Avenue with $7 in his wallet, and a daughter who was afraid they were moving and no plan beyond the most desperate one. And what he'd found there was a woman who was afraid of something different, but just as real. Afraid that fighting for what she'd been given meant admitting how badly she wanted to keep it. afraid that hope was a thing that got taken away from you in proportion to how much you showed it. He understood that fear. He'd carried it for 2 years in the specific form of loving a daughter so completely that any loss became unthinkable, which meant he'd built his life narrower and narrower, clearing out everything that could be taken until there was nothing left to lose except the one thing he'd never had any defense against anyway. You can't protect yourself from the things that matter. That's not wisdom, it's just the plain fact of being alive. You can refuse to try, and Charlotte had done that, and he'd done something similar, and neither of them had been saved by the refusal. What saved them was the unexpected, an envelope in a door, a card with 4 words, a 7-year-old who drew a sun with an expression and set us in pencil without understanding she was doing something permanent. Emma turned 8 and started on a new sketchbook. The science fair ribbon stayed pinned above her desk, both the second-place one from the axolotl project and, 6 months later, the first-place ribbon from the volcano and baking soda project, which Charlotte had pointed out to her was less scientifically interesting than the axolotl, but more likely to win on spectacle. And Emma had said, pragmatically, that winning on spectacle was still winning. And Charlotte had said fair point in the tone she reserved for moments when she was actually delighted and didn't want to show it. Charlotte walked 8 steps in October and 11 in November. And by January, she was crossing the kitchen unassisted, slow and deliberate, and not always clean in the mechanics of it, but hers. Every step belonging to her in the way that things you fight for belong to you differently than things you're given. She kept going to therapy. She stopped treating it as the thing she endured and started treating it as the work, which was a different relationship to have with something hard. She also started using the corner desk again. Logan noticed and didn't say anything. One morning he came into the study and she was at it, the window desk pushed aside slightly to make room, and she was working with the focused stillness she brought to everything. And she didn't look up when he came in, just said, "Coffee?" "Yeah," he said. "There's a fresh pot," she said, and went back to her work. He got 2 cups and set one on the corner desk beside her without ceremony, and she reached for it without breaking her focus. And he took the chair across from her with his own cup and opened the book he'd been reading, and they spent an hour in the study together in the good quiet of 2 people who have stopped requiring each other to perform contentment and are simply content, imperfectly, in the ordinary way of real things. It was not the ending he'd imagined for himself, back when he'd had the kind of life that included imagining endings. It was stranger and harder won, and full of things that had required him to be wrong about himself before he could get them right. He was still figuring out who he was outside the grief and the debt and the desperate dailiness of survival. He was still, some mornings, reaching for a ring on the wrong hand and remembering. He was still not sure he had a clean picture of what came next, but he had a daughter who drew their family in pencil in a sketchbook and handed the picture to someone who needed it. He had a woman who was learning, slowly and with effort and without pretending it was easy, to let the people around her hold something. He had a gate hinge that worked correctly, and a kitchen cabinet that made sense, and a corner desk with someone sitting at it who used to not be able to. He had a life that was not the one he'd planned. It was better in the ways that matter, and harder in the ways that are worth it, and he'd learned that those 2 things tend to come together, because the things you build in the difficult way are built to last. The morning Charlotte walked from the bedroom to the kitchen without stopping was a Tuesday in February. And Emma saw it before Logan did because Emma was always up first and she was sitting at the kitchen counter eating cereal when Charlotte came in. And Emma looked up and went very still and watched Charlotte cross the kitchen to the coffee maker. And when Charlotte turned around, Emma was still watching. "What?" Charlotte said. "You didn't stop," Emma said. Charlotte looked at the floor she'd just crossed, then back at Emma. "No," she said, "I didn't." Emma nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of someone receiving important information. "Cool," she said, and went back to her cereal. Logan came in 2 minutes later and found Charlotte at the counter with her coffee and Emma at the counter with her cereal, and a silence between them that was not empty at all. And he poured himself a cup and stood with them in the kitchen in the February morning light, and nobody said anything for a while because nothing needed to be said. There are people who arrive in your life through the front door, announced, expected, making sense in the context of the life you've already built. And then there are the people who come in sideways, through a crisis or an accident or a card wedged in a door that you almost didn't find. And they don't fit the life you had because the life you had is not where they belong. They belong to the life you haven't built yet, the one that requires you to let the old shape go before the new one becomes visible. Logan had been afraid of that for a long time, afraid of what it meant to let anything in after Karen, afraid of what it said about the years with her, the life they'd had, if he built something new. But you don't honor what you've lost by refusing to live. You honor it by carrying what it taught you into the next thing, by loving the people in front of you the way you learned to love, by being the person your losses made you, instead of the person your losses stopped you from becoming. Emma had known that before either of them. 7 years old with a library book and a stuffed rabbit named Professor Buttons, and the clarity to sit in a stranger's window seat and call it home within 20 minutes, because children don't carry the weight of everything that has already gone wrong. And sometimes they show you what it looks like to simply arrive somewhere and begin. Charlotte walked to the kitchen on a Tuesday in February and didn't stop. And Emma said cool and went back to her cereal. And Logan drank his coffee in the morning light, and the song Sparrow was in the bird bath at 7:15 as usual. And the old oak at the edge of the property was doing its slow, patient work. And the house that had been empty in the ways that matter was not empty anymore. That was enough. That was actually more than enough. It was everything.